Today we talk about the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, their poll numbers, and where they stand on the issues. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is The Giraldo Show. Good afternoon, everyone. This is The Giraldo Show, the conservative podcast. I am your host, Sebastian Giraldo. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the Democratic primary nomination, who are in the polls, who qualifies for the next debate, where they stand on the issues. We're going to go through all of that. So first, let's go ahead and talk about who is qualifying for the fourth Democratic debate. We've already had three. The last one was a couple of weeks ago. The fourth one is going to be set for Tuesday, October 15th. And there is a possibility of there being a second night added. We're not positive yet, but that so far, October 15th in Westerville, Ohio, hosted by CNN and the New York Times. That's where the fourth debate will be taking place. Okay, so who has qualified for the fourth debate? Okay. We have Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, and we have a bit of a surprise, a candidate by the last name of Steyer, which is a bit odd because he hasn't qualified for any of the... His name is Tom Steyer. He hasn't qualified for any of the other three debates, and he just happens to have qualified for this one. So, a bit odd. He's not polling. I don't think he's polling at all. So, it's very... Actually, he actually might be polling because the requirements to qualify for the third and fourth debate is 2% in 4 polls and 130,000 donors. So, you must have 2% potentially in some polls, maybe in some states. He's getting some traction. He has to have over 130,000 donors. So those are the 11 candidates that have qualified for the Democratic debate. Now, I'm not going to talk about all 11. That would be a very long episode. We're going to go ahead and focus on the top 5 based on polling numbers. I'm going to go ahead and get into those polling numbers real quick. So, this is an RCP average. This is taking place with the most recent polls. This is coming from September 9th to September 17th, with the most recent one coming on September 17th. Okay. The top 5 candidates in terms of polling are Biden with around 29% of the polls, 28.8 to be precise. Elizabeth Warren is number 2 with 18.3% of the votes. Bernie Sanders a close third at 16.5. Pete Buttigieg dropping off a lot from 16.5, and Buttigieg is at 5.8. Kamala Harris right behind him at 5.7. So we're going to kind of focus on those 5 candidates today. We're going to go ahead and start with we're going to go into maybe not too much depth on each candidate, but we're going to go ahead and see where they stand on key issues. So in terms of foreign policy, Joe Biden has mentioned that by the end of his first term, he wants to get troops out of Afghanistan, but he did not rule out some U.S. presence when asked. That's the same kind of policy as Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, Pete Buttigieg has put a pretty restrict deadline. He and Tulsi Gabbard have set the tightest deadline on withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, but again, did not rule out some U.S. presence when they were asked. Okay. In terms of education, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris have all said that they want to alleviate debt burdens in other ways. Elizabeth Warren wants to eliminate student debt based on income, so assuming lower income people are going to have their debt canceled. And Bernie Sanders just wants to cancel all debt. So here's the thing. I'll go ahead and go through each of those stances. So for Bernie Sanders, in his issue, he wants to alleviate a lot of money. So as of early 2019, total student loan debt is approximately $1.52 trillion and growing. So Bernie Sanders just wants to say, get rid of all of that. That money will just disappear. It doesn't matter. Again, that is not good policy. We can't just make debt disappear. It'd be as if Bernie Sanders said we're going to get rid of all remaining debts on mortgages. It wouldn't work. Okay. Cancel based on income, Elizabeth Warren, a little bit more moderate. Again, but mostly people who are of lower income are going to have more financial aid. They might even have their scholarships paid for more by other schools, determining on their income. So, again, just canceling student debt is not a great idea. You're going to have a lot of money that just flies under the table, and the economy is going to tank because of that. It won't be a good thing. Alleviate debt burdens in other ways. That's Biden, Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. I mean, I don't know in what ways they want to alleviate it. Maybe potentially with government help, but it's, again, just pay your debts. I mean, you took a sacrifice by taking out that debt, and you have to face that consequence of taking out the debt to finish your education. So you took out a debt, and that's good. But you had to take a sacrifice of knowing that you'll be in debt in the future. You can't just expect the government to just forgive everything, pay off everything. That's not how this works. Okay. Climate change. Now this is the big thing. This is an issue that is interesting. So, do they support the Green New Deal resolution? All of the top 5 candidates, Biden, Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they all support the Green New Deal. Now, the Green New Deal is an issue. It's very. I don't like it. I mean, any conservative wouldn't like it either. Just based on cost by itself. So, it's estimated that the Green New Deal at the low end of the range is going to cost $52 trillion over the next 10 years. And at the high end, it's $93 trillion. Okay, so I love how it says at the low end it's going to cost $52 trillion. Otherwise, we're going to triple our debts pretty much over the next 10 years. All the debt that we've come up with over the past 200 plus years, we're just going to triple it. And at the high end, we're going to pretty much almost quintuple it. We're going to quadruple it and a little bit more. So, I mean, hey, if they want to put us more in debt and then cause a financial crisis in the future, that's them. But me, I don't see that happening. Now, the issue with climate change, and I think this is where a lot of people on the left and Democrats specifically, they want to focus, is that they want to focus on inside the country. Well, the thing is, the United States has lowered their emissions significantly since the year 2005. We've steadily been on a decline. We've actually been able to eliminate around 750 million tons of carbon dioxide compared to the entirety of the European Union that have been able to eliminate less than that. So we've done a pretty good job of reducing carbon emissions. The thing is, the reason that climate change could be doing what it is because of 2 countries, China and India. China and India have increased their greenhouse gases. And that's what's causing this situation. So, here you go. The since 2005, annual U.S. carbon dioxide emissions have declined by 758 million metric tons. It's the largest decline of any country in the world over that time span, and is nearly as large as the 770 million metric ton decline for the entirety of the European Union. By comparison, the United Kingdom was the second largest decline over that period, which reported 170 million metric ton decline. So a drop in the bucket compared to what the U.S. has done. By comparison, China and their carbon dioxide emissions have grown by 3 billion metric tons, and India's grew by 1 billion metric tons. So, if people on the Democratic side, on the left, want to solve climate change, they have to find a way to force China and India to lower their carbon emissions. And I don't know about you, but I do not see China or India doing that anytime soon. So it's going to be very difficult to do that. Okay. Next issue. Immigration. Supporting the extending of the existing physical barrier on the U.S.-Mexico border. Obviously talking about the wall. I support the wall because of border protection. I think it's very important to keep our borders protected in any way possible. Okay, so Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris do not support adding any more wall along the southern border. Which is weird because there's a lot of completely unprotected border on this U.S.-Mexico border. Now, Pete Buttigieg has said that only if experts recommend it. So it's a bit weird because I think a lot of experts have recommended it, especially when the left has admitted that there was a border crisis a couple of months back. So I think experts would recommend putting up a wall or at least putting more border protection. So I would say Pete Buttigieg does support. And Biden has not given a clear answer. Okay. So, in terms of healthcare, supporting Medicare for all. Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they all support Medicare for all, or some version of it. Now, Medicare for all, Medicaid, whatever you want to call it, it's actually the largest amount of debt that we currently have. It's what we're paying for the most in the United States. It's about $1.6 trillion is going into Medicare and Medicaid. And that's an issue that, again, the left and the right have debated over. Me personally, I think what needs to happen is we need to have more privatization of healthcare. I'm not saying completely eliminate Medicare for all, at least not right now. We have to slowly but surely cut down on the costs while also slowly but surely privatizing more healthcare. That way, private healthcare gets more competition, drives down the price while continuing the quality of their product. Private healthcare, as everyone will admit, is much superior to public healthcare. So when private healthcare becomes more affordable, they have to compete with each other to see who can give the best quality. So they drive down their prices, they have to improve their quality, and slowly but surely it becomes much more affordable than a Medicare for all. Because Medicare for all will become so significantly small that people with lower incomes can now afford private healthcare. It's a bit of a confusing issue, but I'll give you a clear example with LASIK eye surgery. A couple of years back, LASIK eye surgery cost $20,000 per eye. Now, LASIK eye surgery was not covered by healthcare. It was more of a convenience cover. Time has passed. LASIK eye surgery is now $500 per eye. That's a 40% decrease in the price. And LASIK eye surgery is one of the most innovative businesses in the nation right now. Companies are coming out with their LASIK eye surgery, keeping the quality of their product high while having their prices low. That's a great example of why private healthcare is such a good thing and why more competition in the private healthcare market will eventually make them, while keeping their quality high, drive down their prices. Now, Joe Biden prefers something else for Medicare for all, so we need to see what he wants to do specifically for healthcare. Okay. Changes to democracy. Supporting eliminating the Electoral College in favor of the popular vote. Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren want to eliminate it completely. Kamala Harris is open to eliminating it. Joe Biden has not given a clear response. Okay. The Electoral College. It's one of the most important parts of our country, and here's why. When you have cities like Los Angeles and New York City that are the biggest cities in the entire country, and coincidentally they all seem to vote Democratic usually, it underlies the votes of people in smaller Republican cities. Urban large cities tend to be where the concentration of Democrats are. And it's usually smaller states, smaller cities that have more of a concentration of Republicans. So the reason the Electoral College doesn't vote is in order to give those smaller states, those smaller cities a chance. Because if you have California and New York, if you just have those two, if you have no electoral college, California and New York dominate the voting, they're going to dominate the elections, and they're going to always they're going to determine the entire country. It's just going to be two states that determine the entire country's fate because they have more population. And that's why the electoral college is so important. By putting a certain number of votes into each state, one or two states don't have complete power over the entire country. That's why the electoral college is so important, and why eliminating it is, they basically want to go by, we're a pure democracy, which we're not. We're a democratic republic. I mean, that's the two parts. We have the popular vote for a reason, and we also have the electoral college for a reason, so that, again, two states don't control the fate of an entire country. So, another issue, I mean, I can continue to talk about a little bit more. In terms of guns, I think every single one of them supports eliminating guns, and I've already talked about that in the previous episode. If you want to tune into that, listen to it, about my argument for why the Second Amendment is such an important right for us to have, the right to bear arms. We need to protect ourselves. But every single one of the Democratic candidates so far, they want to restrict the ability for a legal person to buy a gun, because they believe that they shouldn't have a semi-automatic weapon, even though 2.5 million Americans protect themselves with firearms every single year. In terms of abortion, I'll go ahead and go by each separate candidate. So Joe Biden, he describes himself as personally pro-life, but he believes that Roe v. Wade was correctly decided and that a woman has a constitutional right for abortion. Now, me personally, I am extremely pro-life, and I'll eventually probably have a pro-life episode coming out soon. But for right now, I'll just mention I'm very pro-life. I think that a baby in the womb is a baby. It's not a fetus. It has not a cluster of cells, as some people say. It is a life. And limiting that life for any real reason, you could potentially make a case for rape and incest. But pretty much, I'm against abortion in all cases, and I'll explain more of my case in a future episode about pro-life. Okay, so that's Joe Biden on the stance of abortion. So, Elizabeth Warren on abortion, again, she's pro-choice, wants to keep Roe v. Wade. Bernie Sanders is also very pro-choice. He believes women have the constitutional right to have an abortion. He never voted in favor for any piece of legislation that would restrict abortion, and he recently refused to identify any piece of legislation that he might support that would restrict abortion in any conceivable way. So I'm assuming he's probably against the recent victory for Republicans and pro-life people that took Planned Parenthood off of Title X, which is a great victory, by the way. Again, something I'll talk about in a future episode. Pete Buttigieg, emphatically pro-abortion, refuses to identify a single legal restriction on abortion that he would support. So I guess he's fine with abortion up to 9 months, baby completely viable, kill it. He doesn't care about that. Kamala Harris, in terms of abortion, she's, again, emphatically pro-abortion, wants to end the Hyde Agreement, which historically has banned taxpayer funding of abortion. So she wants her tax dollars. She wants to put that into abortion, to killing babies. Okay. So I'll end off this episode by talking about how these Democratic nominees are going to end up paying for all this, because it turns out that all their ideas demand money, obviously. Especially Medicare, all the Medicaid for all. If they want to extend it to everyone, it's going to have to cost. So Bernie Sanders has been very open about wanting to raise taxes on the very, very wealthy. I think up to 70%. So if you're making $10 million, $7 million of those dollars are going away. Well, I don't know if that sounds good to any of you guys, but if it does, then You can go and support Bernie Sanders. Every other Democratic nominee supports raising taxes on, not on lower classes, but pretty much everyone in, I would say, the top 1% or maybe even the top 10%. But the question is, when those people are getting taxed out of the wall, they have money, they can just leave the country so they don't get taxed at 70%. So what happens then? What happens when every single rich person leaves the country because they don't want the majority of their money getting taken away for causes that they might not even support? The plan completely falls, because then they're going to have to, then the new top 1% in the country is going to become what can now be considered the high middle class. And eventually it all boils down and it doesn't work. That's how these nominees are planning to pay for all of these issues. They want to increase your taxes. They want to take away more of your hard-earned money, and they want to pretty much just distribute it to, especially Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they're kind of one and the same. Elizabeth Warren has been less quiet about this, but she's kind of on the same page as Bernie Sanders. They want to increase your taxes, take your hard-earned money, and give it to people who aren't working and are just living off the government. That is socialism. That is literally what happened in Russia. That is literally what has happened in China, in Cuba. People who are very successful and very wealthy, they're getting their hard-worked money taken away from them and given to people who don't work, who don't do anything. And that's bad. I mean, everyone would agree that socialism is bad. It has never worked, never been implemented correctly. And the fact that 2/5 of these nominees completely support raising your taxes or are very open about it, considering that, it's a very scary thought that they are number 2 and number 3 in the polls. So that's going to be it for today's episode. I want to thank everyone for supporting my podcast. I want to thank everyone who has followed me on SoundCloud, Spotify, on Podbean, on YouTube, and hopefully eventually this podcast will be on Apple Podcasts. So when that happens, I want to thank everyone on there for supporting the podcast. I want to give a quick shout out to a couple of people who have followed me, including Felipe Villegas on Podbean. I want to thank you for being a supporter. I want to thank family members, friends who have just been with me and helped me grow the podcast into what I want it to be. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you leave a like, follow the podcast wherever, subscribe on YouTube, and that's it for today. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is The Giraldo Show.